In 1912, someone walked into a house in Iowa and killed 8 people with an axe while they slept. The murderer was never found. In 2014, a Mississippi teenager was burned alive on a rural road. 2 separate juries heard all the evidence and still couldn't agree on a verdict. Right now, an underground fire has been burning beneath a Pennsylvania town for 63 years, and only 4 people still refuse to leave. Most people hear stories like these and scroll to the next thing. But if you're the kind of person who wants to understand what happens to entire communities when dark chapters never close, when justice never arrives, when questions go unanswered for decades, subscribe. Because what you're about to see isn't really about crime or disasters, it's about what happens to local economies when trust collapses and never rebuilds. And that pattern shows up everywhere once you know what to look for. These aren't ghost stories or true crime entertainment, they're economic case studies. When a community experiences an unresolved tragedy, whether it's a century-old murder or an environmental disaster still burning today, something fundamental shifts. Young people leave, businesses close, property values stagnate, and unlike natural disasters or recessions, unresolved histories don't have recovery timelines. Today we're breaking down 10 small American towns where dark histories remain unresolved, and more importantly, how those unresolved moments change their economic trajectories forever. By the end, you'll recognize a pattern most people miss. Communities don't just need resources and infrastructure to thrive. They need closure, and when they can't get it, everything changes. Across America, small towns already face enormous pressure. Aging populations, young people moving to cities, declining tax bases, the shift from local businesses to online shopping. But some towns carry additional weight that never lifts. An unsolved murder from 1912, a discrimination policy that was never formally addressed, a disaster that's still happening right now. When communities can't close these chapters, when the people responsible are never identified, when policies are never reconciled, it creates a permanent economic drag that shows up in population charts, property records, and business closures decades later. This channel exists to track those ripple effects, the ones that start with a single unresolved moment and echo through generations of economic decisions. Number 10, Prattville, Alabama. An 11-year-old girl knocked on her neighbor's door in August 2001. She never came home. Shannon Polk disappeared from a suburban Prattville neighborhood on what should have been an ordinary Thursday afternoon. 2 months later, rabbit hunters found her body in a remote wooded area. 25 years have passed. No arrest has ever been made. Prattville sits in Alabama's Montgomery metro area, the kind of suburban community that markets itself on safety and family friendliness. But when a child disappears from a neighborhood and the case never closes, that marketing promise shatters permanently. Police collected DNA evidence at the scene. It's never matched anyone. Multiple people were investigated, none charged. Here's what makes it economically significant. A Prattville police officer lived just a few houses away and was one of the last people to see Shannon before she vanished. In small suburban economies, trust in local institutions is everything. When those institutions can't solve the case literally in their own neighborhood, it creates doubt that doesn't heal. Families who moved to Prattville for safety stayed because they already owned homes, but they changed how they lived. Kids stopped playing outside unsupervised. Neighbors started watching each other differently, and 25 years later, when people research Prattville before moving there, Shannon Polk's name still appears. The case defines the town in a way Chamber of Commerce brochures never will. That's not just tragedy. That's permanent economic friction. Could you raise children in a neighborhood where an 11-year-old disappeared and no one knows who took her? Number 9, Courtland, Mississippi. On a December night in 2014, first responders found 19-year-old Jessica Chambers walking out of flames on a rural Mississippi road. She was burned over most of her body. She tried to tell them what happened before she died hours later. Investigators thought they had their case. They brought charges. The trial drew national attention. The jury couldn't agree, so they tried again with a second jury. That jury couldn't agree either. 2 mistrials. The case remains officially unsolved. Courtland sits in Panola County, one of Mississippi's smaller communities where everyone knows everyone, which makes what happened next even more remarkable. 9 different witnesses reported 9 different versions of what Jessica said before she died. Some heard one name, others heard different names. The community split over who to believe. Here's the economic impact. 2 full jury trials in a small county represent massive public expenditure. The FBI investigation connected to Jessica's death led to arrests of 17 suspected gang members on unrelated charges, revealing criminal networks most residents didn't know existed. Property values stagnate when high-profile unsolved cases dominate local news for years. But the deeper damage is to institutional trust. When 2 separate juries hear the same evidence and both deadlock, it doesn't just mean the case stays unsolved, it means the community stops believing the justice system can function for them. Small-town economies depend on faith that institutions work. When that faith breaks and isn't restored, people stop investing in the community's future. They maintain what they have. They don't expand. They certainly don't recruit others to move there. That's how a single unresolved case can freeze economic development for a decade. Would you trust a justice system that couldn't close a case this visible? Number 8. Centralia, Pennsylvania. An underground coal fire has been burning beneath Centralia, Pennsylvania since 1962. It's still burning right now as you watch this. The fire isn't getting smaller. Scientists estimate it could burn for another 250 years. Centralia was a functioning coal mining town with hundreds of residents until the 1980s, when the government finally acknowledged the fire wasn't going out and began buying properties under eminent domain, essentially paying people to leave. As of 2025, exactly 4 people still officially live there, 4 residents in an entire municipality. The borough remains legally incorporated, which creates a bizarre situation, a government structure for a town that barely exists. Roads have collapsed from underground heat. Smoke rises through cracks in the pavement. Vegetation dies in random patterns following the fire's path below. Here's why this matters economically. Centralia represents the slowest form of economic death possible. It's not a recession that ends or a factory closure that communities can recover from. It's a permanent environmental disaster happening in slow motion, where every single day the town becomes slightly more uninhabitable. The median income cannot be calculated because there aren't enough residents for statistical sampling. Property values are effectively zero except for the 4 holdouts who refuse government buyouts. And yet tourists visit regularly, drawn by the eerie spectacle of a burning ghost town. So Centralia generates some economic activity, but only as a cautionary tale, a place people visit specifically because it failed. The town's entire economic identity shifted from production to warning. When your only value is showing others what happens when things go permanently wrong, that's not a recovery. That's documentation of collapse. What would convince you to be one of those last 4 residents? Number 7. Anna, Illinois. Some places have dark histories written in legal codes and property deeds. Anna, Illinois is one of thousands of American communities known as Sundown towns, places that excluded Black Americans through threats, posted warnings, and systematic violence. The name Anna was said to stand for "ain't no N-words allowed." Whether that etymology is accurate or folklore, the exclusion was real. Signs at town borders warned Black travelers to leave by sunset. This happened across 39 states between the late 1800s and mid-1900s. Anna wasn't unique. It was part of a massive coordinated system. Here's the unresolved part. These policies were never formally dismantled. The signs came down eventually, yes, but most communities never acknowledged what they did, never addressed the economic advantages gained through exclusion, never reconciled with the families kept out for generations. And the demographics often prove it. Many former sundown towns remain overwhelmingly white decades after civil rights legislation supposedly ended these practices. The economic impact is structural. When you build a town's foundation on limiting who can live and work there, you limit your own growth potential. Exclusionary communities miss out on diverse labor pools, varied business perspectives, and access to broader markets. They built their own economic ceiling and called it heritage. More subtly, younger generations who want diversity leave these towns, accelerating population decline. The towns can't attract new businesses that prioritize diverse workforces. And the history, once people learn it, makes these places harder to market to anyone outside the original demographic. What was designed as economic protection through exclusion became economic stagnation through isolation. The unresolved nature makes it permanent. Could you move to a town whose entire identity was built on keeping people who look like you out? Number 6. Villisca, Iowa. On the night of June 9, 1912, someone entered a home in Villisca, Iowa, and murdered 8 people with an axe while they slept. 6 family members and 2 overnight guests, all killed in total silence without waking the neighbors. The case attracted national attention. Multiple suspects were investigated and tried. Accusations flew. The community split into factions. No one was ever convicted. The murders remain unsolved 114 years later. Villisca was near its economic peak in 1912, a thriving railroad town where farmers came to shop and conduct business. The murders changed everything, though not immediately. What happened was slower. The steady stream of visitors gradually decreased. People felt uncomfortable coming to town. The investigation contaminated the crime scene because hundreds of curious residents walked through the house before it could be properly secured, destroying evidence. Churches split over who they believed was responsible. Families stopped speaking. By the time World War I shifted America's economy toward industrial centers, Villisca's young people left for cities and didn't come back. The population declined from its peak to around 1,200 today. But here's the twist. The murder house became a dark tourism attraction. You can pay to tour the crime scene. Some even pay to spend the night in the room where children were killed. So Villisca found a new economic identity, one built entirely on its worst moment. The town that couldn't solve its most famous case now profits from people's morbid curiosity about it. That's not economic recovery. That's monetizing trauma because there's nothing else left to sell. When your primary tourist attraction is an unsolved murder scene, you're not marketing a future. You're selling access to a past you couldn't resolve. Would you pay to tour a house where 8 people were murdered in their sleep? Number 5. Saxtown, Missouri. In a Missouri farming community called Saxtown, a neighbor grew concerned when he didn't see a family working their land. In agricultural areas, that absence is significant. Farm families don't take days off during planting or harvest. Equipment breaks down, sure. People get sick, of course. But the land doesn't wait, and farmers know it. So when days passed without any activity, the neighbor checked the property. He found the father, mother, grandfather, and children with their throats slashed from ear to ear. The killer was never identified. The case remains unsolved. Farm economies operate differently than urban or suburban markets. They depend on inherited trust, shared equipment, cooperative labor during peak seasons, and multi-generational knowledge of land and weather patterns. When unsolved violence happens in these communities, it doesn't just affect one family or one property. It breaks the fundamental cooperation that makes rural agriculture economically viable. Neighbors who used to freely share equipment start locking barns. Families who let kids play on adjacent properties keep them closer. The easy movement between farms that made rural life work becomes cautious and guarded. The murdered family's land sat empty, as it often does in these cases. No one wanted to buy property where an entire family was killed, especially when the murderer was never caught. So productive farmland becomes economically inactive. Tax revenue disappears. The local co-op loses business. The community shrinks. And here's what makes it unresolved. In a farming community this small, everyone knows everyone for generations, which means the person who did this might still farm nearby land. That possibility never goes away, so trust never fully returns. And without trust, rural economies can't function at the scale needed for survival. Could you farm land directly adjacent to an unsolved family murder? Number 4. Woodland Park, Colorado. In 2001, a young man named Joshua Maddox disappeared from Woodland Park, Colorado. His family searched. Friends searched. Years passed without answers. 7 years later, in 2008, a man named Chuck Murphy decided to demolish his old abandoned cabin. During demolition, workers discovered human remains stuck in the chimney. It was Joshua. He'd been there the entire 7 years. The circumstances remain unexplained. Some investigators suggested he tried to enter the locked cabin through the chimney and got stuck. Others pointed to evidence suggesting his body was positioned in ways inconsistent with someone climbing down voluntarily. The case was never definitively resolved as accident or homicide. Woodland Park is a mountain community that depends heavily on tourism, second home buyers, and the overall perception that it's a safe escape from urban problems. Mountain towns sell a specific narrative: clean air, natural beauty, and the security of small-town life. Unresolved deaths, especially ones as bizarre as being stuck in a chimney for 7 years, complicate that narrative significantly. Tourists and potential residents start wondering about all those abandoned cabins they see on mountain properties. What else might be inside buildings no one's checked in years? The uncertainty itself creates unease. If it was an accident, that's tragic but explainable. If it was homicide, someone in this small mountain community knows what happened. The unresolved nature means both possibilities stay alive. Here's the economic angle. Mountain resort communities charge premium prices based on perceived safety and escape. When that perception cracks, property values respond, people who bought vacation homes as investments reconsider, new buyers research the town's history and find Joshua's story. And 7 years is a long time for remains to go undiscovered in a place people supposedly know well. That raises uncomfortable questions about how connected the community actually is. Does this change how you think about abandoned mountain properties? Number 3. Windsor, North Carolina. On the evening of June 6, 1993, someone entered Bello Grocery in Windsor, North Carolina after regular business hours. What happened inside became one of the state's most enduring unsolved cases. Windsor's population was only about 4,000 people at the time, small enough that everyone knew the grocery store and most people knew each other. The case has never been solved. Over 30 years have passed. In towns of 4,000, local grocery stores serve as more than retail locations. They're community anchors where people gather information, run into neighbors, and maintain the social connections that make small-town life function. When violence happens at that central gathering point, it disrupts more than commerce. It undermines the space where community itself is performed. Here's what makes the economic impact lasting. With 4,000 residents, the odds are high that the person responsible still lives in Windsor or nearby. That's not paranoia. That's mathematics. Small towns don't have the population turnover of cities. Families stay for generations, which means 3 decades later, people are still shopping in the same stores, attending the same churches, and working at the same businesses as someone who might know exactly what happened that night. The grocery might have changed ownership, the building might have been renovated, but everyone who lived there in 1993 remembers, and they've passed the story to their children who weren't born yet. So Windsor exists in permanent suspension, too small to forget, too invested to leave, and too close-knit to trust completely. That's not an environment where businesses expand or young families move in. It's an environment where people maintain what they have and quietly wonder. And maintenance without growth is just slow decline with better lighting. Could you stay in a town where you might be shopping next to someone who got away with murder? If you're still here, you're seeing what most people miss. These aren't random tragedies. They're economic turning points that redirect entire communities for generations. Subscribe right now if understanding these patterns matters to you. And hit like, because this information changes how you see small-town America forever. Number 2. Miracle Village, Florida. Florida has some of the strictest residency restrictions for registered sex offenders in America. They cannot live within certain distances of schools, parks, daycares, or bus stops. In many communities, those restrictions make it functionally impossible to find legal housing. So a solution emerged that's both pragmatic and deeply unsettling. Miracle Village, a community where convicted sex offenders live together because nowhere else will take them. It's not a prison. Residents aren't incarcerated. They've served their sentences. But Florida's restrictions created a situation where concentrating them in one isolated location became the only viable option. The village exists in legal gray space, technically compliant but socially segregated. Residents describe life there as serene, almost too serene, which makes sense. It's a community of people marked by their worst documented acts, living in proximity because society solved the problem of where they should live by creating a place no one else wants to be. The economic impact is total isolation. Mainstream businesses don't operate there. Employment opportunities are severely limited. Property values exist in a category completely separate from normal real estate markets. But here's what makes it economically significant beyond the village itself. Miracle Village represents the ultimate consequence of unresolved social policy. When communities can't or won't integrate certain populations, when laws make normal reintegration impossible, the result is economic segregation that solves nothing. It hides the problem geographically while concentrating risk. The debate continues whether this approach creates greater danger or manages it better. What's not debatable is that it represents total economic failure for everyone involved. The offenders can't participate in normal economies. The surrounding communities don't benefit from their labor or spending. And the unresolved question of what successful reintegration looks like stays permanently unaddressed. Is Miracle Village a solution, or just a way to avoid dealing with the actual problem? Number 1. Sundown towns. Across America. Between the late 1800s and mid-1900s, thousands of American communities across 39 states created sundown towns, municipalities that excluded Black Americans and other minorities through posted signs, discriminatory housing covenants, threats of violence, and coordinated intimidation. This wasn't a regional aberration, it was a national system. Dearborn, Michigan, home to Ford Motor Company, employed 15,000 Black workers who legally could not live in the city where they worked. The massive Levittown suburban developments, which accounted for 8% of all post-war suburban housing, explicitly excluded African Americans and Jews. Signs at town borders warned non-white travelers to be gone by sunset. Police enforced these rules formally and informally for decades. Here's what makes this the #1 unresolved dark history in American small towns. These policies were never formally dismantled. The signs eventually came down. The explicit covenants became illegal. But most communities never acknowledged what they did, never addressed how exclusion built their entire economic foundation, and never reconciled with the families and individuals kept out for generations. The result is visible in current demographics. Many former sundown towns remain overwhelmingly white decades after civil rights laws supposedly ended these practices. That's not coincidence. That's the lasting economic impact of exclusion that was never resolved. Communities that built their identity on limiting who could live and work there created their own economic ceiling. They cut themselves off from diverse labor, varied business perspectives, and broader markets. What they called protection became isolation. And because it was never addressed, younger generations who want diversity leave. Businesses that prioritize inclusive workforces avoid these towns, and economic stagnation becomes generational. You can't resolve what you won't acknowledge. And most of these communities still won't. How many former sundown towns have you driven through without knowing their history? Whether it's a murder from 1912, an environmental disaster still burning today, or entire systems of racial exclusion that were never dismantled, the economic pattern is identical. When communities cannot close chapters, when questions stay unanswered, when justice never arrives, when policies are never addressed, the economy freezes around that unresolved moment. Population charts show it, property records prove it, business registrations confirm it. Young people leave because they can see the stagnation even if they don't fully understand its source. Businesses struggle because economic growth requires forward momentum, and unresolved histories anchor communities to their worst moments. Property values plateau because buyers research towns before moving, and these stories appear in every search. But the deepest damage is to trust, which is what really makes local economies function. Trust that institutions work. Trust that neighbors are safe. Trust that tomorrow offers more possibility than yesterday. When dark histories go unresolved, that trust never fully rebuilds. And without trust, communities don't invest in their own futures. They maintain what exists. They protect what they have. They don't expand, recruit, or risk. That's not recovery. That's permanent economic suspension. And that's the real story these 10 towns tell. If this helped you understand the economic story behind the headlines, subscribe right now. Every week, this channel breaks down the places and patterns most people won't think about until they're already affected by them. Subscribe if you want to see where things are headed, not just where they've been. Because these towns aren't outliers. They're showing us what happens when foundations crack and communities can't repair them. That's not morbid curiosity, that's economic literacy, and that's exactly what this channel exists to provide.